Surprisingly, not a lot has been updated with the new 4.7 characters Clorinde, Sigewinne, and Sethos. Clorinde received the most changes of the three. She gained damage buffs to her elemental skill, Ascension 1 passive, and second constellation, while receiving nerfs to her elemental skills, self-healing, and her first constellation's damage proc interval to compensate. On the other hand, Sethos received only nerfs for himself and his bow, while Sigewinne received a buff to her elemental skill flat damage bonus and her first constellation, plus a shift in power to her 6th constellation. Since Clorinde is the only one who has changed in a meaningful way, let's start with her and how the changes impacted her teams. Clorinde already looked to have a lot of potential, and her damage buffs only made that potential more clear. However, the healing nerf on her skill from 120% of her current bond of life to 110% was rather detrimental. Since the initial 100% is used to clear her bond of life, her personal healing value got halved from 20% to 10% of her max HP. This effectively reduced her healing from about 140% of her max HP during her on-field time to only 70%. This nerfed her ability to use Fiorina, since she can no longer constantly pop Fiorina's team-wide healing passive effect for faster fanfare gain and for the ability to use Fiorina as the sole defensive support in her teams. While she can still be used as a defensive support, it will be less successful since Clorinde can't heal as much. Despite this nerf, these damage number increases turned out to be a buff for her damage potential in her best teams, and an even larger damage potential increase in her teams without Fiorina. Due to her incredibly fast attacks, I'm finding that Clorinde works incredibly well, specifically alongside Aggravate, since it buffs her damage output potential drastically. Her highest damaging comp consists of Nahida, Kujosara, and Kazuha, in order to massively buff her damage potential to ridiculous heights. However, this comp is not safe, and it can have issues swirling Electro due to Nahida. To remedy both of these issues, you can swap out Sara for Beto and or Kazuha for Fiorina. The strength of these teams is the combined damage output of everyone involved in tandem with the pseudo-defensive potential that each unit comes with. Clorinde has a good amount of choices for that second Electro slot in these teams, as she can always be paired with Kujosara for the hyper carry role, Beto for a more defensive unit that excels in AoE, or Fischl 2 when against single target content. This ends up being a pattern with the rest of her teams. Clorinde plus Nahida and Kazuha or Fiorina end up making a very powerful Aggravate or Quick Bloom core alongside any other unit, be it Bennett, Yunjin, or even Lisa. All work and should have a rather easy time reaching that good baseline 60,000 DPS threshold. She can even be used as a pure hypercarry alongside Kujosara, Bennett, and Kazuha or Chevreuse. These two teams pump her full of so many different numbers as she could take on content with ease by just using their buffs. However, Chevreuse teams could use more pyro application to keep her passive up, at which point Xiangling can also become a major powerhouse alongside Clorinde. This would lead to a lower DPS on paper than the ones before, but since they're much more consistent, I believe they'd end up being much better in practice. These comps are only just a few of the ones that I have tested. She has many more that work just as well as some of these can, since her average team damage tends to plateau from here on out. However, there are some teammates I want to mention that do drag Clorinde teams down. I want to preface first that you can use these units, but they are simply not as good as others available, and if you do want to increase your team's DPS in any way, these are the first units that you're looking to swap. First is Zhongli, who offers good resistance shredding and strong defensive utility. However, he deals almost no damage, and Clorinde barely needs his defensive utility. If she wanted some shielding tankiness, she could always just use Jingshou or Kirava, who would both deal much more damage while still offering her the tankiness that Zhongli provides. Baizhu is another character to stray away from for similar reasons. He has too much defense that she doesn't need with 0 damage. There is little reason to use him over a unit like Lisa, who can do his job better for Clorinde with Prototype Amber. In fact, avoiding most defensive units in the game that don't have cracked buffs is a good rule of thumb to follow. Clorinde is very self-sufficient defensively, and these units will really weigh her teams down. Instead, use pseudo-defensive supports like Beto, Jingshou, and Fiorina, or Catalyst characters wielding Prototype Amber that also have buffs in their base kit like Nahida, Heizo, Lisa, Mona, or Sucrose. All of these options will fill the same party slot as the likes of Baizhu, Zhongli, Kokomi, and the like, while also helping the team in a meaningful way. Another unit to avoid is Candace, who offers a small buff only to Clorinde's normal attacks and little hydro application. While this might sound good because almost all of Clorinde's damage counts as normal attacks, and because she prefers quicken teams over Hyperbloom, Candace does not have strong enough buffs or damage to elevate a Clorinde team. If you're looking for raw damage buffers, Banish Shivers, and Yunjin will all do a better job, and better hydro applicators would include Jingshou, Yulan, and Furina. Clorinde seems to be in a very powerful spot right now as a main DPS unit. Her teams are able to consistently reach a high damage output while still being super safe and easy to use. Clorinde's ability to be used as a tank is her main strength and weakness. It allows her to utilize a team of pure damage and damage buffing, but at the cost of turning every defensive support in the game into a massive DPS loss for her. This makes Nahida her best teammate, with Furina and Kazuha tied for second, Kuchusara and Fischl in third, and with most other offensive characters tied for that fourth or fifth spot. Clorinde was always the best unit of the upcoming three. That still holds true now, as the other two have issues, with Sigewinne having the least amount of them. In my first video, I mentioned that Sigewinne had great potential in Wet Rock and in elemental skill spam teams. Since then, I redid my calcs for Wet Rock just to be sure, and yes, it is still slightly better than the Mono Geo Chiori variant. To all those that pulled for Chiori, I'm sorry, but your girl just got kicked out of her best comp in just 2 patches. This is why we don't pull for Geo. But I also did my calcs for her skill spam teams. These teams turned out to be rather underwhelming overall, but especially because of Fischl. For most flat damage buffers, using up all of their stacks is usually more important than using the perfect amount of them. But skill spam teams normally include aggravate and spread flat damage bonuses, which reduces the effectiveness of additional flat damage bonuses. A unit like Fischl hits so fast that her damage spikes with aggravate. However, these fast attacks take Sigewinne's flat damage bonus from Furina, who doesn't gain the flat damage bonus from aggravate or spread. It ends up turning Fischl into a flat damage hoarder who takes the buffs other units want for herself with little benefit. This ends up reducing the overall DPS of the team by about a third. The Sigewinne, Yaimiko, Furina, Nahida comp is the only real skill spam comp that works. Even the Geo skill spam comp doesn't work too well, so Sigewinne sucks, right? Well, after realizing that most skill spam comps are just not good, I looked back toward Wet Rock and thought, would this work with every hypercarry that relies on only one other character? And yeah, it does. She's actually really good in these spots, specifically with Nuvilette alongside Kazuha, Ito alongside Goro, Wanderer alongside Feruzan, and Xiao alongside Feruzan. While some of these comps do have a better variant out there like Xiao does, these will be some of the best teams she has available right now. At the current moment, Sigewinne generally works best when she's paired with Furina as a strong duo along with almost any other strong duo in the game. This could be a hypercarry DPS with their specifically made buffing support, or a reactionary unit alongside their reactionary enabler. Either works, but in all other situations, Sigewinne will usually just be a DPS loss over any other defensive support. While I might have been relatively successful finding a few comps that Sigewinne could always work in, I can't say I found the same success with the most flawed character of the three, Sethos. Everything Sethos has or can benefit from also has a downside to it, negating the benefits. Because of his annoying nature, I have had a really hard time finding comps for Sethos to work in. However, I have happened upon a few constants which I want to go over first. During my attempts, I discovered that his main DPS playstyle and Quickswap DPS playstyle both deal similar damage, with Quickswap edging out ahead by only a minor amount. The only real differences are that the normal attack playstyle is more convenient to do since there are more supports for that playstyle. Playstyle doesn't require aim, it has a small energy requirement, and the playstyle is shared with more units than the other. Quickswap is very different, as it requires a lot of energy funneling and aim, but for the sake of more damage and potentially shorter rotations, leading to an even higher DPS than the more traditional playstyle. With all that said, I will be using his Quickswap playstyle as a default, unless he's using a normal attack support like Yulan. That being said, I also want to mention artifacts, as I am not using Wanderer's Troupe anymore. Instead, I'm using Thundering Fury and the Instructor's set. Ever since his particle generation turned out to be 2, I decided to make the switch to Thundering Fury because he cannot sustain his own energy requirement without it. While it would lead to 1% less damage when comparing their direct numbers, Thundering Fury offers Sethos an extra skill, which grants an extra 2 particles and 12 flat energy. This reduces his energy requirements severely, enough to nearly completely fix any energy issues he would have had in his Quickswap playstyle. Since Sethos' personal damage is so low, and since his damage relies so much on elemental mastery, especially in Hyperbloom teams, I also wondered if it could potentially be better for him to use instructors over the other two. And yeah, it will usually be the better option. While Sethos will deal less damage, it's not significantly less due to his reliance on elemental mastery for damage, and because he will now buff his teammates, who usually make up about the same damage as he does. The only time it became a strict damage decrease was when his personal damage became significant to the team, like when he's paired with Baiju, Ujosara, Lisa, units like those, and when he does not have those strong aggravate damage dealers like Beto, Fischl, and Yaimiko. However, because his best teams normally incorporate these strong damage dealing units anyway, and because a lot of his team's total damage output comes from Hyperbloom and other units, most of his best teams encourage him to use the Instructor's set. So when looking at the total damage that he and his teams can output, I will place the Thundering Fury variant of the comp on the left and the Instructor's variant of the comp on the right. While Clorinde and Sigewinne might easily find themselves in comps that can reach the 60k plus DPS threshold, Sethos struggles to reach even that baseline. However, I have found some that can reach it, and even some that can surpass it to 70k. Generally speaking, his best comps are quad DPS focused, which is not ideal since his kit cannot support these comps without proper dodging and stamina management. Instead, he relies on others to hard carry the team, which is not fantastic. These are not ideal and are far from anything I can actually recommend using. Instead, his best comps that are actually safe take a hit in damage, but will be much more reasonable. His best comps here are alongside Nahida, Yurina, and Baiju, which basically turns Nahida into the main DPS from off-field, and Kirara, Kazuha, and Fischl, since they each deal decent amounts of damage with 2 or 3 of them buffing the team. These are the only 2 teams I have found that are on par with or that surpass many other comps, including some quad DPS comps, and even then, these teams struggle to deal any meaningful damage. They're all below the base 60k DPS threshold that all comps should be at, which is quite a downer for this little Electro boy. But that's all I have to mention on the update for Clorinde, Sigewinne, and Sethos' teams. Now, tell me what you think of these units. What buffs or nerfs do you expect in future betas? Do you think Clorinde will receive more buffs? Maybe more nerfs for Sethos? Tell me what you think in the comments below. But with that, I will skedaddle. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye!